do repairs to bumpers, and it be not only simple but easy, and to make it easy on the body man. I spent 30 years as a body man. I spent 15 after that doing recycled bumpers. We're going to do a short video on how to do some simple repairs to different bumpers. This is the first one of probably several we'll do. This particular bumper here that we're going to do a short repair on is an Ultima rear bumper. Now, this bumper is a cheap bumper compared to some of the more expensive bumpers, and even though it's a cheap bumper, it didn't have really that much damage, but it was replaced. This bumper is simply caved in with a small tear on it. That was all the damage. The rest of the paint on this bumper is very good. This bumper could have been repaired completely, primed and sent to the painter in about 2 hours. Now, most people don't believe that. You could have got paid several more hours for doing it, but it's the same way a body man could actually do this in a couple of hours. Now, the one thing that I like to point out about repairing a bumper, if a bumper is caved in, you want to heat the outside of it. Never heat it on the inside. Heat it from the outside if it's caved in. If it's pushing out, somewhere, heat it on the inside. Now, on this, what I would do a lot of times when I was doing recycled bumpers is simply kind of give myself an idea of the outer edges of what this bumper is sticking out the most at. And that's kind of what I call the outer ring. And then when you heat a bumper to bring it back to what you want it to be originally, let me turn this weld on. This machine is set up with a GFI plug over here also where it's easy to get to work your other tools, especially like your heat guns and different things that you need a plug for. But I usually would put my heat gun on the high setting as I could get it on, start heating this outer ring. And once I'm set up and I get that bumper hot enough, then I reach the point that my hand is uncomfortable to the back side. When your hand becomes, the bumper warming up and your hand's uncomfortable, that plastic has reached the point that it'll start coming back to where it belongs. I've heated this bumper to where it's very uncomfortable to your hand on the back side. I've got it to the point that it will relieve that dent that's been pushed into it. Now usually when I get one where I push it out like that, what I would do is I'd take an old screwdriver that's got a good smooth end, and I would go to work in that bumper where I could look into the shine of it and actually see what I'm doing and be able to tell that it's rolling back out. Now sometimes you'll get what I call a little outer ring. You can take the back side of that and you can just simply work that little outer ring a little bit and make that material go back to where it should be at. Same as the old process that we used to do when we took our body hammer and beat that outer ring down on sheet metal. Because you know you always, when you push a dent out or work a dent out on metal, you've got to beat back down what's pushing out at you. So you simply work that part of the bumper back down while she's good and hot. And then a lot of times, if you got a little bitty tin, and that's real good there, a little bit of a high place, you can take you some 80 grit on your big DA. You can knock that down because you've got a little bit of thickness to deal with. Now this bumper only had a small cut in it, which is probably no more than about an inch and a half. And here in a minute we'll do an actual weld on that. And if you got an old screwdriver where it's very blunt and you've kind of sanded it off, it works great to have something to kind of work that material with. And remember this on any polypropylene bumper. It's got limited memory. It ain't like the old urethane bumpers where we used to put them in the hot bath and make them come back to memory. These bumpers, you've got to actually work them back to the memory. And it doesn't take that much because the heat itself, once you get it to that temperature where the bumper relaxes and what have you, you can go to work in it and bring it right back to the point that you'd like to have it at. And that's one of the advantages, for instance, with this machine. I was able to put this on the machine, I clamped it to my pad, it made it very stable here where I could work on it. Now, on any other type of situation where I'd had to put it on a fender stand or what have you, it would have made it a little difficult. But this idea was to make it easy because there were so many times where I wished I had something better to work off of when I was working bumpers. Okay, I've completed the part where it was caved in. I've got it back into the shape that it needs to be in, and we need to go to the part of actually performing a weld on this right here. Now, in the process of this weld, remember this, there's two tools that you really need. Of course, they're die grinders. But you need one of these little burr tools that's got this type of head on it here, which is the rounded one. And then you need the other one, which is the one that's got the pointer. And by it being real sharp pointed, you can take this particular burr tool and you can do your little holes where your, say, 10 millimeter screws goes in for the sides of the, where it connects up to the fender wheel or the wheel opening, and drill them out each time. You cannot use a drill bit because a drill bit will hang with you, and when it hangs, it tears up the bumper. These are what I've always used through the years, and this is the only two that I've ever actually used to do it. Of course, this ain't the two I use, but I mean, what have you. But we're going to grind this and prep it for a weld now, and do an actual weld where you can see how simple this would have been to repair and with the minimal amount of time. Now the only reason that I always grind the first or the front side is basically so I can get that weld not only down in there, but whenever I do my grinding, I'm bridging over and I'm leaving my weld in there. The back side, you can weld it without grinding down into it. Now there is times where on certain welds you have to grind the back side also. But in this area here, it being out in the middle of a bumper, you be out a little bit on the front side, do a weld, and then when you do the back side, just run the ribbon. If you want to grind it off a little bit, that's up to the person's own choice. I never grind them off. I usually shoot a little undercoating on them and leave them. Of course, in case when we were doing recycled bumpers, we blacked the back side completely. In a case where you're only doing a small repair on a bumper, you can shoot you a little undercoating over it. That will seal it off good, and then that would complete the back side. We're going to start the welding process of actually welding this little cut up that's in this particular bumper. This welder has already been sitting here heating up for a couple of minutes, and it's heated up to the temperature where I can't hold my hand in front of it. Always heat up, and you'll always do it this way, heat up on your air side, and then trip over to your nitrogen side. This little switch trips it over to nitrogen. It takes just for a couple of seconds for it to actually get nitrogen coming out through here for your shielding gas. We're using a polypropylene rod because we're using polypropylene on a polypropylene bumper. Now, the one thing you can do a lot of times is you can start heating that tip right there, and you'll see it go to looking real shiny like it's liquid glass or melting, because it'll look clear. But you start your weld and you get it there to where you can just get it right over there to where you can get a little bubble in front of it. And when that little bubble starts, it looks just like a little bubble of water running in front of you. And then you just run that little booger right on up to the end of there. And you don't want it to get too close to your finger because it will burn your finger. Now when you run out to the end of that, you can take the back side of your welder and you can clip it off. Now, that particular weld there is completed. Now on the back side, which we may not do it at this moment, you can go to the back side of the weld and you can just run the ribbon wide. You don't have to V-groove it, in other words, because it'll melt all the way through to where it needs to be at. Now, there has been times where I did V-groove where I wanted it to where I could grind it off and smooth it one thing or another, but in most cases you can just leave the ribbon when you get through doing the weld, throw your little undercoating over it, and you'll be through. As soon as you complete this weld here, you reach over here and you trip your nitrogen back over to the air side because you don't want to be wasting your nitrogen. So I switched it back to the air, and it's just going to sit there and heat. Now, if you're going to be a little while before you actually do another weld, you can go ahead and turn your quick, just flip it off. Leave your temperature set where it's already set at, trip it off, and then just set your welder back over in your cradle, and that way it'll sit there and be cooling off. Okay, we have took the Rolex and we have lightly ground this off and got it down to the surface that we want, so we're real smooth. Remember this, so when you grind off with Rolex, you'll get what you call overlap slag. That's when the weld burns over on to the other weld. You don't want to leave that on there. You can take you some 80 grit and you can take and work it and knock it down to where it'll be just a pretty clean weld, just like this is right here. Now, this weld has been totally completed for this bumper here on this side. We'll run a ribbon on the back side, and then this weld will be over with. This bumper could be DA'd with some 180 grit, primed with some waterborne primer, let it dry good, lightly sand it with 180, and then come back and put your polyester filler on it, and you use polyester because you want a little bit of flexibility. Never use a filler that is not polyester on a flexible bumper. And then once you worked your filler and got it perfect, put you another coat of waterborne on top of that, and take and lightly hit it afterwards with some 400 or what have you. Get rid of any what we call the hair, and then maybe you might have to put another light coat, but then you'd be finished with this bumper. You could send it to the paint shop. Okay, I've already prepared this back side of this for a weld, and in this particular case, I decided I needed just a little bit of a V-groove on this side. So I beat it out just enough that this weld would go through and kind of form a set of alligator teeth all the way through to the other weld. I'm going to switch now that I'm heated up. I'm going to switch over to my nitrogen side. Count to like 1, 2, 3, and that's their nitrogen to be at the tip of this. And then we're going to start a little weld that we're going to run right here on the back side. And usually if you run that little burr tool there just a little bit, you'll have cleaned that weld up real good. There's my little bubble. It's beginning to roll just like a little marble there in front of it. And I'm just going to let that little booger run right on out to the end. And my finger's getting hot again, so I'm going to pull it back. That's one thing you have to be careful of, is not burn your finger. And even if you burn it, it won't hurt. But take your welder and do the back side and pinch it off like that. Throw your ribbon down, switch back over to the air side where your welder can be on the air side, and then just go ahead and flip your switch because you're through with your welding, and that way your welder will be cooling back down. Now, put the welder back over in the cradle, and on the back side, if you have a desire to do it, you can take your little Rolex and just lightly hit this ribbon. Now, that's basically all you need to do to that weld right there. And it is just as smooth as it can be. And you can throw your little rubberized undercoating on there to seal it a little bit. It's bonded in good. What I did want to point out about the bumper smith, just like you see I set this bumper upside down, I was able to put a clamp by flipping my arm. That gave me a little bit of stability here where I could work without me bumping it and flipping it off in front of me. Now, you can always use your C-clamp like that on most any position on this particular table. Like I was earlier, I had my arm turned up right here, and I had my pedestal on there, and I had the clamp on the inside. Either way, it makes it real easy for a bumper repair to be done and done properly. And remember, when you get ready to do something, do it right. Do it with the bumper smith.